Welcome to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Jim McDonnell. He is the police chief for the city of Long Beach. He is also a rumored candidate for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. That election would be held in 2014. Sir, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
I want to speak with you about gun control, gun violence. I'm not sure what term to use anymore.
Yeah.
It's very loaded, if I can use that pun. But as we speak today, sir, it appears that there is some movement in Washington in terms of the gun control debate, looking specifically at background checks, gun trafficking laws, and creating some type of federal money that will build a school security plan.
Right.
What's your sense of what's happening in Washington?
You know, I think there's been a lot of movement back and forth on this issue. I'm happy that there's a dialogue occurring about the issue, because for a long time there was not much of any kind of talk back and forth. When you look at it, the Newtown, Connecticut shooting, I think, is what put it on the front burner for everybody.
Can I ask you, though, that was most interesting to me, because before Newtown, we had the shooting at the theater in Aurora.
Right.
We had Gabrielle Giffords, a congresswoman, shot, almost killed. She's injured for life.
Right.
6 people died there. We had the Sikh shooting in Wisconsin. With each incident, it would seem to me that there would have been movement after that incident. But no. It was Newtown that caused the country to kind of blink and say, maybe it's time. Why do you think that? I mean, yes, it was kids, but
yeah,
still.
I think that's really what it is. I think it was the sheer number of kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are no more innocent victims than young children in a school environment. So I think emotionally that took a toll on everybody in the nation. But it created a dialogue, and I think it was cumulative. I think the Newtown shooting, on top of everything else that's going on, kind of spurred the debate. When you look at how it breaks down across the nation, even within the policing community, major city chiefs came out in support of legislation prohibiting assault weapons.
Including you?
Yeah, I'm part of major city chiefs.
And I got to ask you about that, because it is so interesting to me. I have the good fortune of interviewing chiefs, sheriffs from up and down the state. And it really does break down urban versus rural. The urban chiefs are very much in favor of increased gun control measures, whereas the rural chiefs are not, to the extent that many of those chiefs or sheriffs are sending letters to Senator Feinstein specifically opposing an assault weapons ban, as an example. Why?
You know, I think it's you're working to try and deal with issues that you have in your own jurisdiction, trying to deal with your own constituency. And when you look at the difference between major city chiefs and major county sheriffs, even there's a major disparity as to the feeling of how any of this would play out. The major city chiefs are very supportive of an assault weapons ban, limiting magazine capacity size and background checks. And the major county sheriffs were much more in support of focusing on the background piece, but not so much limiting in any way in their mind the Second Amendment rights of Americans.
On the issue of assault weapons, I understand that part of the frustration with those that oppose the assault weapons ban is, what is an assault weapon? And I get that completely. Where I think many people kind of break with that Second Amendment position is on the magazine question. A magazine is the number of bullets you can shoot with one trigger pull.
No.
Well, that demonstrates the confusion. Please.
A magazine is just the holder for the bullets. There's talk about what's the appropriate number of bullets that could be in a magazine. Some say 7, some say 10. What we see now are magazines up to generally 30, but you also see drums then that can go up to 100 that feed certain weapons. So trying to say what is a reasonable number, I think again it goes to reasonable for what. What kind of weapon are we talking about? What is that weapon being used for? Is it hunting? Is it target shooting? Is it collecting? That all needs to be kind of hashed out.
What's interesting is I believe at the Aurora incident, the magazine was 100 bullets, and I believe in Newtown it may have been 30 bullets within that one magazine. In California, those are illegal as we speak today.
They are, right.
So where do you see the magazine debate moving?
I think I look at the whole debate across the country, and I think that right after Newtown there was a much bigger push to go for, much like the Feinstein bill, limiting capacity on magazines, outlawing the purchase of assault weapons.
But those bills are dying.
Right,
I mean,
exactly,
they're not going anywhere.
exactly. So now I think what we're seeing is if people are going to coalesce around an issue at all, I think what we're seeing is them doing that with background checks, with mental health screening.
And do you believe that's worth it? Is it a step in the right direction, or is it a pure violation of Second Amendment rights and just a step towards creating a national registry of gun owners that can be used against them?
I think we need to, as a society, we have an obligation to everybody in society to try and provide for public safety. When you look at the Second Amendment and you look at the issues of mental health and trying to protect people who aren't in a position to protect themselves, from limiting them from purchasing weapons, those kind of things I think are things that we have an obligation to do. How you define assault weapons, whether or not those weapons are limited, how they're defined, and magazine capacity or Second Amendment issues more so. But the mental health piece, who can actually purchase, who's a prohibited possessor, those are kind of things that I think that you take a step back and you say, for the good of public safety, what's the call going to be on that?
And there's no question that when you look at public opinion polls, you have 90% support for increased use of background checks. So the public has coalesced around that issue.
Right.
In the backdrop of all of this, crime continues to drop. You know, we hear about a lot of sensational criminal events and acts, but in major cities around the country, including Los Angeles, including Long Beach, crime drops. I'm flummoxed.
Yeah.
You know, yes, we've turned the corner on our economic woes, but crime has been dropping throughout the recession. I mean, we had seen some upticks with property crimes, but nothing to what we would expect.
Yeah. I mean, when you compare, I'll use Long Beach as an example. When you look at our 2012 numbers, and we were able to finish up the year with the lowest violent crime numbers we've had in 40 years, with fewer officers out there, but I think trying to work more strategically, trying to work more closely with the community, trying to use the community for eyes and ears, and encourage reporting of crimes, not tolerating things that maybe otherwise they would. People tend to get engaged when they perceive things being very bad. That somebody's got to do something, and then they pick up the phone.
Is that a new phenomenon? Because we think, well, the reason I ask is I feel as if maybe a pre-9/11 mentality, I don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
I don't want to get involved.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if kind of post 9/11, it became cool to be a cop. You know, it used to be keep the cops away from me. Now it's like, thank you, sir. You know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. I think post 9/11, it became cool to be a firefighter.
Well, but a little, a safety officer.
Yeah. I look at the willingness of the community to engage. Where I was going with that is that when things are bad, you run a community meeting to talk about an incident or a series of incidents, and you get a great turnout. When things and the suspect's in custody and things are back to normal, if you will, that people go back to their full lives. The challenge for us, the leadership challenge, is to keep the community engaged when things are good. And with 40-year lows in violent crime numbers, things are good. That's a great foundation to be able to build on, rather than to wait for that crisis again and then try and work off the crisis.
What about the property crime issues?
Yeah, property crimes are an issue, as we've spoken about before. Much of that we can do quite a bit about. And a lot of it, when we look at the number of burglaries, commercial burglaries, residential burglaries, garage burglaries that we've had, many of those are because people left their garage door open, they leave their windows, their doors open, they're not paying attention to safeguarding their own home or their vehicle. And when you look at those kind of things, if we can engage the community and people buy into the fact that, yeah, I live in a nice neighborhood, but I need to protect my property, if we have more of that going on, we'll have fewer and fewer property crimes. The suspects will go somewhere else where the target is not as hard.
Do you feel as if, as we look forward, that these trends will continue on the downward spiral?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I think that a big part of the success we've had is we police differently than we did in years past. Much more strategically, much more analytically. We focus on patterns, trends, and clusters of crime, and we deploy accordingly. We don't just use a template and send officers out there to random patrol.
Okay, his name is Jim McDonnell. He is the police chief for Long Beach. He's also a rumored candidate for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
Under the FBI current background check system, how many individuals are barred from purchasing guns? The FBI's database lists 7.3 million individuals who are barred from buying guns.
Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're now joined by Doug Haubert. He is the city prosecutor for the city of Long Beach. And so we just spoke with Jim McDonnell, the police chief, and we were talking about crime rates. And I continue to be just amazed at how violent crime has continued to drop, despite the fact we face tough economic times, and that can cause just kind of a frenzy of fear, which can lead to more violent crime, but yet keeps dropping. What's your sense?
Well, Chief McDonnell and the police department are doing a terrific job dealing with violent crime. I think a lot of it has to do with our focus on the gang problem in Long Beach. According to the FBI, over half and as much as 90% of violent crime is gang-related. So our gang injunction program, for example, we have increased our gang injunction program, and we've had over a 600% increase in arrests.
For our viewers statewide, explain exactly what a gang injunction does.
Well, a gang injunction is a civil court order that prohibits a gang member, once he's been served, from participating in certain activities that amount to a public nuisance. So things that may not seem like crimes become a crime when you're subject to an injunction order. What it does is it allows the police, it gives them an additional tool to stop people. For example, if they're out at a park late at night and if they've been served with the gang injunction, the police officers can stop them and find out what they're doing.
Some folks have raised concerns that that limits someone's freedom of association under the First Amendment. I understand that issue has been litigated.
It's been litigated successfully, and the Supreme Court says that gangs, when an injunction is properly done, the due process is accomplished. They have a due process. They either don't fight the case or they fight it and they lose. But once an injunction is placed on them after that due process, they have to comply with that court order. And that court order is giving the police department the tools to go after the gangs here in Long Beach and the gang areas. And I think that is keeping violent crime down to a large extent.
Does Long Beach have a particularly severe gang problem vis-a-vis other large cities?
You know, the FBI says LA County has more gang members than any other county in the United States. So by virtue of being in LA County, there's going to be a gang problem. There's no large city in LA County that does not have a gang problem. Plus, the gang problem sometimes has lasted, 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
You're not going to get rid of that gang problem immediately. It's going to take a while. One of the things our truancy program is trying to target is at-risk kids to prevent, keeping them in school also prevents them from joining a gang. Gangs are looking to recruit kids as early as 12, 13, 14 years old. So our middle schoolers who are not in school, they may be getting in trouble. They may be recruited by gang members. So it's a long-term strategy to prevent gangs from growing.
Some have expressed concerns, though, that with the truancy program, those that get targeted tend to be those from economically disadvantaged areas because they may have transportation problems, they may have a younger sibling they need to babysit. So it's a little complicated.
Well, yeah, I think you'd be surprised. I think what you would find is the truancy problem cuts all demographic levels, all ethnicities. And the one thing at the core of all of them is there's a lack of understanding of the value of an education. Here in America, we have free public schools. That's not true in other countries. We provide free education. It's a very good education, but you have to take advantage of that. And we do have parents. Some of them, by the way, they grew up in America. They went to school themselves. Their parents forced them to go to school, but it just doesn't seem to be a priority for them to get their kids to school every day.
So what do you do with the parents? I mean, you may be able to access the kids, but if the parents aren't supporters...
Well, under new state law, we can prosecute the parent of a chronic truant. If a kid misses 10% or more of a school year without any excuse, we can prosecute the parent. It's a misdemeanor under state law. It's a new state law.
And so that would be your office because you prosecute misdemeanors.
My office would prosecute the parents. We do that, but only after we've met with the parents, we've gone with the counselors, we've met with the school officials. Once we understand what the problem is, we try to address the problem out of court. It's only when after all these meetings we can't address the problem that we go after the parents.
Have you had prosecutions?
We have. We actually had a very high-profile arrest here. It was all over the news. France was considering a law similar to California's, and France Channel 2 came out to interview us.
How interesting.
And they met with one of the parents who simply said, I didn't think it was that big of a deal for my kid to be missing school, but now I get it. Since we had the office conference...
So that parent was prosecuted?
That parent was not. After we had our initial office conference, that kid never missed a day of school. It was only because it took us to get the attention of the parent and show how serious it was. And once the parent learned that the parent could get in trouble, not just the kid. This isn't detention for the kid. Once the parent can get in trouble, I think they see it in a different light, and it hopefully gets their attention.
But have you actually taken a case to trial? Have you had to?
We've not had a case go to trial. We've filed 3 cases. I believe all 3 have pled out.
I see.
All we're looking for is probation that requires the parent to take their child to school. That's the main thing, is to get the kid to school every day.
I want to continue on the crime rate. Even though we've seen violent crime drop, we have seen property crimes tick up.
Right.
They were actually trending down during the early parts of the economic downturn, but they're ticking up now. Why do you believe that's happening?
Well, obviously there are a number of things happening at the same time. DA Steve Cooley called it a perfect storm. You've got realignment causing the early release of people from county jail. You've got a cutting of after-school programs, for example, and a lot of our property crime happens to be committed by juveniles.
Are the AB 109 prisoners, the realignment prisoners, committing these property crimes? Do we have those studies yet?
Well, as far as a quantitative study, I'm not aware of one. I will tell you anecdotally, there's no question that realignment is causing early release faster than ever before, and a lot of these people, instead of spending 6 months in jail, are spending a week in jail or 2 weeks in jail. It creates more opportunities, and there's no question realignment is part of the problem. I'm not going to say it's the entire problem, because it's not. We've got economic realities. There are no jobs for people. So it's harder for people to support their families, and sometimes they resort to crime. Cutting of after-school programs, cutting of parks and recreation programs. There are a number of things that are happening all at the same time.
Budgets are looking better, even in Long Beach, even in California. So do we have the resources to start bringing those after-school programs back, those park programs back? I mean, I know you're not on the council of the legislature, but still, you have your bully pulpit, and there's no doubt that law enforcement can play a role in these debates.
Well, I would describe economically what we're doing is we're bottoming out. I don't see an uptick. I don't believe any office, any department in the city of Long Beach is going to have more money next year than it had this year. Here's my hope, though. Here's my hope is that when resources return to the city looks at long-term approaches. The city right now is contemplating a violence prevention plan. Hopefully it's a long-term plan, and I hope the city puts something together that will look at truancy, look at young adults, look at after-school programs, and look at adopting steps that will affect the crime rate, not just this year, not just next year, but over a 5, 10, 15-year period. You have to have a long-term approach to this. Otherwise, you're just going to start spending money again in an ineffective way without a focus on the real problems, getting to the root of the problem. But if you do focus on it, when resources come back, I think we'll be able to make Long Beach a better city.
I want to ask you about a topic that continues to be in the news, and that is medical marijuana. You may have seen a poll came out nationally that for the first time, Americans are supporting the full legalization of marijuana. That's a side issue, but it's interesting to mention. That being said, Long Beach has been at the center of the medical marijuana controversy. As we speak, the California Supreme Court has heard a case and will decide a case, and it's desperately needed because the cities are very confused about what to do. But what is Long Beach doing as an example of a large city in our state that's trying to grapple with legal uncertainties?
Well, Long Beach was one of the few cities that decided to attempt to regulate dispensaries, marijuana dispensaries, storefronts that actually dispense marijuana. Long Beach cannot change the Compassionate Use Act, so medical marijuana is available to people anyway. The question is, how do you regulate, either allow or prohibit storefronts from being involved in this as a business sort of venture? There's been conflicting Court of Appeal opinions, which is why it's now in front of the California Supreme Court. Some opinions have said that local governments have the ability to regulate and the ability to prohibit outright dispensaries. Other court opinions have said because the Compassionate Use Act is state law, a local agency cannot prohibit them. That's left Long Beach with a difficult decision. Do you allow them to happen without any regulation, or do you prohibit them? And Long Beach has decided, I think wisely, to prohibit them until the law settles out. Once the law is clear on what the city can do, I think the city then will probably look at going back and trying to regulate it.
So today there are no clinics operating in Long Beach?
There are no legal dispensaries operating in Long Beach. The problem was while the city of Long Beach was trying to regulate them, they essentially allowed or turned their back on those that they expected to give permits to.
Right.
So they existed. Now, when Long Beach found out they couldn't regulate them, they adopted a complete ban citywide. So all dispensaries in Long Beach are currently illegal, and slowly the city's been shutting them down. There's no grandfathering because they never actually received a permit.
Interesting.
They never got a permit. They just opened up expecting to get a permit someday. They never got that permit.
His name is Doug Haubert. He's the city prosecutor for Long Beach. When we come back, we'll be speaking with one of his colleagues. Her name is Laura Doud. She is the city auditor for Long Beach. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back.
Which metropolitan areas saw the smallest spike in violent crime in the first 6 months of 2012? Cities with populations of over 1 million saw the smallest jump in violent crime in the first 6 months of 2012, 1.7%.
Welcome back to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We're now joined by Laura Doud. She's the city auditor for the city of Long Beach. And I was just speaking with your city prosecutor, Doug Haubert, and we were talking about medical marijuana and the dispensaries that are now being shut down in Long Beach. And I was fascinated to learn that through an audit that your office did, the question of medical marijuana enforcement came up. Who would have thunk? Why don't you explain that?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, please.
As city auditor,
Yes.
my job is to make sure the city is collecting all the revenue due to the city. So we've been going down the list of revenues. As you know, we've done the parking citations audit and so forth.
Animal services.
Yes, correct. And so we did this business license audit to make sure the city was collecting all license fees. And it's a significant revenue source for the city, approximately $12 million annually for business licenses.
That's serious.
Right, that's right. And we found out that there's about $2.5 million outstanding that's not being collected. Efforts were not being concentrated on collecting those business license fees. And in digging a little bit deeper, we found the reason why they weren't collecting is because their concentration efforts, time, and resources were spent with the medical marijuana issue and shutting down the dispensaries.
It is unbelievable to think that this issue is permeating so many different departments. And apparently, the city council in Long Beach gave the power to this department to handle the enforcement of medical marijuana regulations when the clinics were open, and then when the ban got passed the following year to deal with the shutdown. And so what your audit uncovered is maybe their focus was misplaced.
Yes, exactly. I think the audit really does highlight the cost that the city bore as a result of those staff resources being diverted to the medical marijuana issue. This was it cost the city something, and we estimated that about 2.5 in uncollected business licenses.
And what's frustrating for anyone that's kind of a good government type and looking at this situation is a lot of that money has been sent off to collection agencies, and the question becomes, is it collectible, and is it even seen as an outstanding debt at that stage?
Right. I think the longer an outstanding debt is not collected, the less likely you are going to be collecting. So it was another highlight of the audit. Look, we have to concentrate our efforts quickly on those receivables that are due to the city and make sure that we do everything in our power to collect the money that's due, because the longer you wait, the less likely you're going to collect.
And are these fees, are they a great amount? I mean, as I understand it,
average license fee is about $383.
Right. So what's going on here? Are people not aware that they are required to pay a city license?
I think they're probably aware, but I think out of sight, out of mind. They don't remember. It's not a priority. If they're not getting a reminder, collection bill.
Are there bills sent?
One is sent annually, but then after that, it's sent. But we need to, keep sending them.
No past due notices.
Right. We need to do a better job at doing that.
No past due notices, Madam Auditor. That's outrageous.
It was terrible. And so that's one of the items we recommended in the audit, to make sure we have follow-up, and then penalties on top of that when you're late.
But couldn't the city place a lien on the business? I mean, it seems as if the city has tremendous power.
Yes, you would think that, and that's a good idea. But I think what they're trying to do is work with the Franchise Tax Board to allow the city to intercept refunds before.
Can that happen? How would that happen?
Well, they would have to
work through the Franchise Tax Board?
Yes.
So where do we go from here? I've interviewed many people in your position in Los Angeles and Riverside, and you do these great audits, and then you're independent, you can't enforce anything that you say.
Well, I mean, I believe that our office is somewhat of the enforcement arm. Every audit of ours, at the final recommendation, is to come back and give us a status report on the recommendations that you have implemented, and if you have not, the reasons why. And so we have the power to go to the council to say, look, this is the audit, this was our recommendation, it's not being implemented, and we need it.
And what happens when that happens? Or does it not happen? I mean, do you feel as if your audits are reviewed and taken seriously?
Yes, I do. And I just learned the other day that the Business License Bureau is out there collecting business licenses that have not been paid. I think 30 on one particular block just came in.
You're kidding.
So
That must make you feel good.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you're actually, your work is worthy.
Right.
I want to talk to you about a proposition that passed a few years ago. You were a proponent of it. It's known as Proposition H. Give us some background. Our show, of course, runs statewide, so give us some background about Prop H, why it was important, and why it has really been of tremendous benefit to the residents of Long Beach.
Great, yes. In 2006, when I first came into office, again, we were looking at the budget, we're looking at revenue sources. The oil production tax in the city of Long Beach was 15 cents per barrel.
And is that high, low, medium?
That's low. When we did a benchmark study on all neighboring cities, it was the lowest.
Wow.
City sits on a huge oil well, as you know. It was the lowest out of all neighboring cities. Oil producers pump about 14 million barrels of oil per year.
Oh my.
And the price of oil, the 15 cents per barrel tax was established in 1990. I took office in 2006. That tax had not been increased in over 16 years. There was no index or anything to increase it. So the price of oil had tripled, and the tax hadn't stayed with it. So we did.
Where was Signal Hill? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but it was higher.
It was definitely higher.
Yes, it was definitely
higher.
higher.
So what's most interesting is Californians don't like passing taxes. It's very difficult to pass taxes. You need a 2/3 vote. I mean, some of that may be changing, but be that as it may, it passed with, was it 70%?
Yeah,
How did that happen? It wasn't the first time in Long Beach history?
Yes.
Right.
That a tax like that had passed. And it was a really huge victory because, I mean, you really can't even get 70% of the people to agree on apple pie, let alone a tax increase, right? But we really got the message out. We worked together. It was a coalition group with myself, my office, the police and fire, which it benefited.
And where, talk to us about where that money has gone and will continue to go.
Okay, yes, this money went to the police and fire, divided up evenly. This money brings in approximately $3.5 million annually. So this tax increased from 15 cents per barrel to 40 cents per barrel by 25% increase. And so that $3.5 million is being divided between police and fire.
I want to get a sense from you about the importance within the language of Proposition H that the city auditor had some specific auditing authority for this money. How important was that?
I think that was really important. I think the voters are sometimes
suspicious?
Suspicious, yes, of where the tax dollars are going, if they'll be siphoned off to something else.
And so even though Prop H said it needed to go 50-50, the fact that you have the power, what exactly is that power?
To audit the money each year, to determine that money is being spent directly for police and fire. It has purchased approximately 9 police officers, 9 firefighters. Purchased a new fire truck and the related equipment and supplies that go with that, but all for public safety, a huge benefit to the community. There's several other alternatives that had failed in the past to get a tax increase. This was the perfect one. We were able to inform and educate the voters that this was not a tax on them, it was a tax on the oil producers.
So does it index?
Yes, it indexes by the inflation of the consumer price index.
Now, the flip side, though, is, yes, it's not a tax on consumers per se, but we know oil companies, and they pass on taxes, and, you know, ExxonMobil, we've heard their multi-billion-dollar profits.
So I'm glad you brought up that point, because that's what part of the education process is, that the oil in Long Beach is not high enough quality to go back to gasoline. It is the gunky stuff that makes asphalt.
Oh, you're kidding.
No. So it's not going to be passed on to the producers. It's just strictly with the oil producers. The oil producers didn't fight this.
They didn't?
No.
Wow.
So they
How
knew,
and why?
They knew in 16 years it had never been increased. The price of oil had tripled. They were making money hand over fist. This was equitable and fair with all the neighboring cities, the range they were charging. So this was fair. It was reasonable. It was a great relationship. And the voters ultimately bought it and voted for it.
So when you look at city budgets and you look at taxes, I've heard a rumor that Long Beach's city budget may be balanced.
Yes.
I mean, what do you think, Madam Auditor? Do you think it's possible?
You know, yes. And
yes, right.
I give the mayor and the council enormous credit for balancing the budget. I really do. And they have put pension reform as a priority, which is huge. All of the unions, fire, police, and IAM came to the table. They are now paying their share. It's just a huge victory, I think, for the city as a whole. Again, the oil money is helping us balance this budget, so we're grateful for that.
Okay, her name is Laura Doud. She is the city auditor for the city of Long Beach. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.